Hey everyone, it's time for another deep dive. And this one, well, let's just say this one's for the Bitcoin believers out there.
That's right. We're talking about a potential Bitcoin bull run and whether all this buzz is actually pointing to something huge on the horizon.
We're going to look at some charts, analyze some trends, and try to cut through the hype to see what's really going on.
And to do that, we're digging into a couple of fascinating articles from Cointelegraph. They've been dissecting some recent Bitcoin activity, and let me tell you, things are getting interesting.
Okay, so first up, one analysis suggests that Bitcoin might actually be mirroring the patterns it showed just before the 2020 bull run.
Yeah, this is where things get a little technical, but stick with me.
Please break it down for us.
So Cointelegraph is highlighting these interesting similarities in how the price is moving. And it's got a lot of people talking about these things called parabolic phases.
Parabolic phases sounds a little intimidating.
It's actually not as complicated as it sounds. Basically, think of it as periods of exponential growth, kind of like those moments when Bitcoin just seems to skyrocket, And these jumps, they aren't just random. They're often rooted in market psychology and follow these, well, predictable patterns.
So you're saying there's a method to the madness.
Exactly. And if this fractal analysis that Cointelegraph is talking about proves accurate, we could see some seriously big gains for Bitcoin. I'm talking potentially reaching $250,000.
$250,000. Wow, okay. I'm listening.
Yeah, it's based on how closely the current price action is resembling what we saw just before that 2020 surge. Think of it like this. This analysis is basically taking these historical charts, overlaying them and identifying these recurring patterns.
So if history repeats itself.
If history repeats itself and Bitcoin follows its own playbook, that $250,000 figure, it could become a reality.
Okay. So charts are hinting at a potential bull run. Got it. But what about the big players? What do they call them? The whales?
Oh, yes. The whales. Always good to keep an eye on them. Well, there's this thing called the exchange whale ratio, and it's flashing a pretty familiar signal.
Okay, now you're just using whale lingo. What in the world is the exchange whale ratio?
Sorry. It's basically a way to track how much Bitcoin these large holders, these whales, are moving on to exchanges. Think of it this way. When you see a spike in this ratio, it could mean that those whales are getting ready to sell.
So like a signal that something big is about to happen.
Exactly. And what's got everyone buzzing is that the current pattern, it looks a lot like what we saw right before that 2020 bull run we were talking about.
So they're getting ready for another big play.
It seems that way. And one analyst even went as far as to say that these whales, they might be strategically positioning themselves to cash out after the next halving.
Wow, talk about playing the long game, right? But hey, let's switch gears for a minute here. The articles we're looking at, they also mention another piece of the puzzle, stablecoins. Apparently there's something interesting happening on that front too.
Absolutely. We got to talk about stablecoin dominance.
Stablecoin dominance, okay.
Yeah.
Another new term.
Basically, it's the percentage of the total crypto market cap, like the whole pie, that's held in stablecoins, Tether, USD coin, those kinds.
Got it.
Now, here's the thing. When this dominance drops, when people start moving away from stablecoins, it often means they're taking their money out of those safer havens and putting it back into more volatile assets, like Bitcoin.
So they're feeling more risky.
Yep. They see an opportunity for growth and they're ready to jump back into the Bitcoin market. And historically, when this happens, we often see surges in crypto prices.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Exactly. And you know what? One of the Cointelegraph articles actually has this amazing chart. It shows how when the stablecoin market cap goes up, Bitcoin price tends to go down and vice versa.
An inverse relationship.
Totally. But okay, before we get too carried away with all this bullish talk, we got to address the elephant in the room, right?
Let me guess. Governments.
You got it. We can't talk about Bitcoin's future without considering how governments might react to all of this.
Yeah, you're right. And that brings us to that Minneapolis Fed paper, right? It feels like it kind of throws a wrench in things after all that optimism we were just talking about.
It definitely introduces a different perspective, let's put it that way.
So what's the main takeaway? What are they saying?
Well, they're suggesting that governments might feel the need to step in and intervene in the crypto market, maybe through things like taxation or even...
bans? Seriously?
Yeah, some even suggest that. Their argument basically boils down to control. They're worried that Bitcoin, because it's decentralized, could make it harder for them to manage the autonomy, Sounds like deficit spending, keeping inflation in check, that sort of thing.
So it's a threat to their power. At least in their eyes.
Exactly. And they have a point, This one expert quoted in the paper even said that governments, they want to make sure that their debt is seen as the only truly risk-free asset out there. And Bitcoin kind of throws a wrench in that.
Interesting, because it's decentralized, right? And it has that fixed supply.
Right. It challenges the whole system. And that makes some people nervous. It really makes you think about how governments are going to adapt to this whole new landscape. Will they try to work with cryptocurrencies, or will they see it as a threat that they need to control?
It's a tough question, but it's one we definitely need to be asking.
Mm.
And you know what I find really fascinating about all of this? The Minneapolis Fed, back in 1996, they put out this paper that, well, it's almost like they were describing Bitcoin before Bitcoin even existed.
Oh, yeah. The money is memory paper, right?
That's the one. It's about the ideal characteristics of a currency, and it's crazy how closely it lines up with how we talk about Bitcoin today. A fixed supply, not tied to any physical asset. It's wild.
Almost prophetic, right? It just shows you how perceptions of technology can completely transform over time, or sometimes how they just stay stuck.
It's true. And it highlights why it's so important to stay informed, to question what we think we know, and to come to our own conclusions.
Absolutely. Don't just take our word for it. Do your own research, look at those charts, and form your own opinions.
It's kind of like we've gotten this, this peek behind the curtain of how this all works,
I like that, a peek behind the curtain. Because we really have seen how all these different factors play a role. Like we talked about technical analysis, those historical patterns, even how the whales are behaving. It all gives us clues about where Bitcoin might be going.
But then on the flip side, you have these big picture questions about governments and regulations. Like, how is that all going to play out?
Exactly. It's this balance, this tension between innovation and regulation. And honestly, I think it's only going to get more complicated, more interesting as we move forward.
So where do we go from here? Like, if someone's been listening to this whole conversation, what should they be thinking about?
Well, first and foremost, don't just take our word for it. We've laid out the analysis, the potential signals, but now it's time for everyone listening to do their own digging, form their own conclusions.
I love that. Research, research, research. Look at those charts, stay up to date on what's happening with regulations, all of it.
Absolutely. And maybe even more importantly, think about what role you want Bitcoin to play in your own financial life. Like, what makes sense for you?
That's what it all boils down to, right?
Yeah.
We can talk about bull runs and price predictions all day long, but at the end of the day, it's about understanding what's happening, making informed choices that align with, your own personal financial goals.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, I think you're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Bitcoin. Thanks to everyone for joining us. And remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to cryptocurrency.